Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And that world was once resigned to a simple fact. The underwhelming Justice League movie that we got in 2017 was the only Justice League movie that we were going to get. Now I admit, I saw that movie in theaters. I was even excited about it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. I just remember leaving the theater so underwhelmed, feeling like I'd seen a movie that was lacking in so many areas. And I wasn't alone in that sentiment. The movie underperformed and was critically panned. And for good reason, too. For a movie that brought together some of the most iconic superheroes in pop culture history, it was remarkable in just how unremarkable it was. And most were content to write it off as a flop. However, there were still hints of a larger story within, traces of a bigger, bolder vision that was never fully realized. And it didn't help that this movie was deeply affected by a personal tragedy that hit director Zack Snyder's family. During production of this movie, his daughter tragically took her own life. And we should all take a moment to acknowledge just how devastating that was to everyone involved. And while Snyder stepped away to deal with this terrible tragedy, Joss Whedon was brought on board to finish and effectively recut the movie. Now there's a lot I could say about Joss Whedon. The man may have given us some awesome Avengers movies, but in terms of creative style and vision, he couldn't have been more different than Zack Snyder. He and the powers that be at Warner Brothers basically reshot and re-edited this movie into something totally different, and the end result was a barely coherent mess. That's what ultimately led to the Release the Snyder Cut movement. Many wanted to see that vision that Zack Snyder started. They believed there was a much better version of this lackluster movie to explore. That belief was so strong that it went from being a popular hashtag to a full-blown movement, one that did admittedly get ugly at times. Personally, I never participated in that movement. Yes, I was among those who wanted to see Snyder's full version of Justice League, but I honestly never thought it would come out. Warner Brothers were just so adamant. The Snyder Cut didn't exist. There was no better version of this movie. What we saw in 2017 was all there was. That was it. End of story. Except it wasn't. There was a version of this movie that never came out, a version much more in line with Snyder's grand vision that began with Man of Steel. And after years of advocacy, some coming from Zack Snyder himself as well as the cast, it finally happened. Warner Brothers announced they were releasing the Snyder Cut on HBO Max. This iteration of Justice League was actually being released. I honestly didn't think it would happen, but it did. And I made it a point to forget the 2017 version and embrace Zack Snyder's Justice League in all its darker, grittier glory. And after watching all 4 hours of it and taking some time to process it all, I'll say this. It was a much better movie. In terms of tone, story, style, and character, this movie improved on damn near everything. Yes, it's 4 hours long. It's also much darker than a standard Marvel movie. And if you have a weak bladder, it would be a difficult movie to experience in theaters. But taken in its totality, it's still a hell of an experience. As a superhero movie, it's unlike anything that came before it. It dares to challenge just what a superhero movie can be. And by the end, you want to give Zack Snyder a hug and a high five for fighting to complete this vision, even after such an unspeakable family tragedy. Now, there are a lot of things that made this version better than its predecessor. In the grand scheme of things, it's a much more coherent story overall. It takes full advantage of its 4-hour runtime, establishing characters, exploring backstory, and doing some large-scale world building. These are all things that the previous version tried to rush or gloss over, but this one really takes its time. And that effort has an impact that is profound in large and subtle ways. And the biggest benefactor of this effort by far are the characters. Cyborg, the Flash, and Steppenwolf are much more fleshed out in this version. Cyborg especially gets more development. He is not a side character in this movie. He plays an integral part in furthering the plot. His stakes in the conflict are also much more personal. Seriously, if you're not a Cyborg fan by the end of this movie, what more do you want? The main villain, Steppenwolf, also benefits from more development, and I would argue he needed it much more than Cyborg. In the 2017 version of the movie, he was as generic a villain as you could get. He just wanted to unite the mother boxes and destroy the world. That's pretty much it. There were small hints or teases of a larger motivation, but the Snyder Cut is much less vague. While he is the most pressing threat, it's clear that he's only a small part of a much larger evil. And he's motivated by more than just causing destruction. There's a personal element to his actions. We even get to see the face of that agenda in Darkside, whose powerful presence adds immense weight to the plot. Seeing him and hearing his menacing voice, giving life to one of the greatest villains in the history of comic books, it has an impact that the previous version never came close to matching. And that added impact makes the actions, choices, and struggles of the Justice League feel more critical. Everything they do and why they do it fits together in a more cohesive narrative. Each character has a role. That role plays to their strengths as well as their unique personal stories. From the actions during the final battle to the interplay between the characters, nothing ever feels contrived or forced. There's still plenty of scenes and moments from the previous version of the movie, but there's just a lot more context in Snyder's version. Things don't just happen on a whim. Nothing is underplayed or toned down. And characters don't just do things for the sake of giving themselves more screen time. What they do actually makes sense in the context of the situation. And this is especially noteworthy in the final battle scene, which differs considerably from the theatrical version. Flash and Cyborg play much more specialized roles. They're tasked with doing things that only they can do. And that's critical, because it makes the Justice League feel like a real team, one that makes use of their unique skills in all the right ways. And that kind of consistency makes the Snyder Cut much easier to follow. Despite the long runtime, it never drags or stalls. Every scene matters and nothing feels choppy or cobbled together. It also helped that it's divided into 6 chapters, so it feels more akin to binging a 6-episode show rather than a singular movie. And on a platform like HBO Max, it works perfectly. But if there's one aspect of this movie that stands out the most, one thing that makes it one of my favorite superhero movies to date, it's how everything culminated in the end. From the very beginning, I could feel things building towards something epic. I got the same feeling when I saw Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. But those showdowns took years to build over the course of multiple movies. This movie managed to achieve that in one focused 4-hour narrative. And that's a hell of an accomplishment, one I didn't think was even possible. But as soon as the Justice League descends on Steppenwolf's stronghold, having come together with a plan and a full understanding of the stakes, it's powerful. You want to cheer them on. You want to just lean in and take in every glorious moment. From the arsenal in the Bat Tank, to Wonder Woman's brawl with Steppenwolf, to Superman coming in at just the right moment in that badass black suit, it's such a satisfying convergence. Even though the tone and the themes are fairly dark, it still felt like a triumph. We see these iconic heroes win the day, as we've seen in plenty of other superhero movies. But Zack Snyder's Justice League still found a way to make a special impact, and that in and of itself makes it a remarkable achievement of cinema. On top of that, it really did leave me wanting more. That's another aspect of this movie that really sets it apart from its predecessor. It does much more to lay the foundation for more stories. It also greatly expands the dark vision of the future that Batman saw in Dawn of Justice. And even if you hated Jared Leto's Joker in Suicide Squad, he still really shines in the limited time he has. And you're still left wanting more by the time the credits roll. Now, whether or not we get more, it's hard to say. As of this recording, DC and Warner Brothers say they don't intend to build on this movie. Now, that plan is subject to change, because as we've seen before, if enough fans demand it, the studio will take notice, and they will jump at a chance to make more money. But even if those movies never happen, this version of Justice League is a hell of an accomplishment. It's a truly unique movie, one that follows its own formula for creating a compelling superhero narrative. We see through this extensive cut that Snyder was really onto something. And it wouldn't be the first time either. That is somewhat of a common and frustrating theme with Snyder's movies as a whole. It happened in Batman v Superman, and it happened in Watchmen too. Zack Snyder has a bit of a history of telling bold movies that often lose critical elements in the editing process. That's why the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman is the only one you should see. And it's also why the extended cuts of Watchmen are far better in so many critical ways. These movies may be long and dense, but Snyder tries to make every moment count on screen. And this vision of Justice League maximizes this detailed approach. Now, it's still not without flaws. There are still some moments in this movie that don't work quite as well. I feel like Barry Allen could have benefited from more scenes, and Lois Lane definitely could have done more than just be there for Superman and his mother. And yeah, some of the slow motion shots did get a little excessive at times. That's another running theme with Snyder's movies. But at the same time, there were plenty of moments where that approach worked perfectly. Overall, Zack Snyder's Justice League proved that he had a unique vision for these characters and this world, and it was a story worth telling and experiencing in its complete realized form. It took a lot to get to this point, both for the fans and for Zack Snyder personally. The fact that Snyder included a dedication to his daughter at the end just made it all the more fitting. After such a harrowing cinematic experience, it hammered home the idea that this movie was a labor of love. It required more labor than most, but it was so worth it in the end. And even if you never saw the first version of Justice League and aren't a huge fan of DC Comics characters in general, I still encourage you to see this movie. If you have HBO Max and happen to have 4 hours to kill, check it out. You'll get something unique, something you just can't get from the MCU or any franchise owned by Disney. Zack Snyder's Justice League is a remarkable achievement for fans, the genre, and the world of film. To him, the cast, and the fans who fought to make this happen, I applaud you. You really did do this movie justice. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, take care and stay safe.